I think you would agree that every person should have some understanding of faith and religious matters. If you attend church, if you observe rituals, or in general, if you consider yourself a Christian, it is your direct responsibility to delve into the questions of your faith. Even if you don't, you still live among believers, and in a country that historically has been Christian, so you inevitably encounter those questions in one way or another. Therefore, it would be quite beneficial to have some knowledge about Christian dogma and how it has influenced art. And one of the reasons I have always loved the history of art is because art is meaningful. And very often it reminds us of important philosophical and religious matters, bringing us back to them and prompting us to contemplate them. So let me share with you a fascinating example of how it does just that. In Rome, there is a famous church called Santa Maria Maggiore. One of the reasons why this church is renowned is because it houses early Christian mosaics from the mid-5th century. And one of those mosaics, which you can see right here, is quite extraordinary. Actually, I will tell you about the mosaic in a second, but before I have a very brief story for you. So, as you probably know, I'm from Russia. But I had to flee from the country when the war started because, for a person of my views, it was just simply dangerous to stay there. So I got out. Well, I drove out, to be precise. So I was in my car. And once I got to Europe, I thought, well, what's next? And then I realized, okay, I have some time on my hands, so I might as well take a trip and do some driving around Europe, which I've dreamt about for many years. So I did, and I've been to Germany, I've been to Greece, and I've been to Italy. And I got to Rome, which was a lifelong dream of mine because, I studied ancient Rome back in the university when I was younger. So I got there and I spent the whole day just wandering around the city, taking it all in, having an occasional glass of wine. That was unforgettable, right? And by the end of the day, I got to Santa Maria Maggiore. And it was closed by then, so I did not make it in, but I sat down in the middle of the square in front of it, and so I'm sitting there and trying to absorb the beauty of its facade, which looks like this, and suddenly, right behind me, I hear two voices, and of course they speak in Russian, and one of them says, «Ну хорошо, мы теперь в безопасности, но нужно же что-то делать», which, for those of you who are not fluent Russian speakers yet, although, when Mr. Putin takes over the world, you will have to learn Russian inevitably. But for now, I will provide you with the translation. The voice behind me said, okay, we're safe now, but we gotta do something. At which point I turned around and politely said, I'm sorry to interrupt, but it seems like you and we have much in common. So do you mind if I join your conversation? And they did not mind, and I did join it. And of course, those two people turned out to be immigrants just like me. So yeah, we did have much in common, and we did have matters to discuss. But can you imagine the absurdity of the situation? I mean, 3 immigrants from Russia accidentally meet in Rome in front of Santa Maria Maggiore, of all places, to talk about what future holds for them. And let me tell you, that conversation was not optimistic. I mean, the life which I find myself amidst of is like some grotesque theater of absurdity. But, you gotta do what you gotta do, right? So, Enough of my complaining. I'm sorry I took you there. I just wanted to share this experience because it was so meaningful for me. But let's go back to our Santa Maria Maggiore now. So let's go back to the topic at hand. Mosaics in the church Santa Maria Maggiore. One of those mosaics, which you can see right here, is quite extraordinary. It depicts the adoration of the Magi. At the center, on an elevation, sits Christ on a throne, accompanied by Virgin Mary, surrounded by the Magi. The Magi, as you may recall, were believed to be from the East, and they are depicted wearing those distinctively shaped hats called Phrygian caps. Phrygia is an ancient state located in modern times Turkey, and since ancient times such caps have been used to represent people inhabiting that region. But here is what's unusual about it. The iconography of the scene is odd. We are accustomed to seeing the adoration of the Magi depicted with Virgin Mary holding the small, newborn Christ, which aligns with the biblical descriptions, since the Magi have arrived soon after Christ was born. But here, Christ is not a little child, rather he appears as a teenager, with a thoughtful expression and a rather mature demeanor. Why is that? To answer this question, we need to briefly recall the religious disputes of that era. The church of Santa Maria Maggiore was constructed, more accurately, rebuilt, shortly after the conclusion of the Third Ecumenical Council, also known as the Council of Ephesus. And Ephesus is a city in the Middle East. The 4th and the 5th centuries were a time of significant doctrinal debates for the Christian church. With Christianity having become the official religion during the 4th century, since Christians were no longer facing persecution from the state, it was the perfect time to establish order in terms of doctrine and what Christians should believe in. One particular issue sparked a great deal of controversy at that time, namely the question of how the divine and human natures of Christ are united. After all, Christ indeed possesses two natures, and the Church has always insisted that they are, on the one hand, inseparable and unified, and on the other hand, distinct. Consider this. Christ as a human died on the cross, while Christ as God is immortal and exists eternally somewhere up there in heaven. At the same time, if Christ died on the cross solely as a human, then his death would not have been able to redeem our sins. Thus, he must simultaneously be both human and divine, capable and incapable of suffering. This is difficult to grasp, as it contradicts our common idea of logic. Consequently, a series of heresies emerged during this period, attempting to give this doctrine a more intellectually digestible form, if you will. The most prominent of those is the teaching of a certain Nestorius, who claimed that Virgin Mary did not give birth to God, but rather to a human child. In fact, he refused to call her the Mother of God, and he insisted to refer to her as the Mother of the human. Then, according to him, the divine Logos, which is a Greek word for spirit. Well, not exactly, it's very nuanced actually, but I don't want to get into it right now. So, divine Logos somehow took over this child. And when Christ died on the cross, it was the human Christ, his physical body, that died, while the Logos ascended. I'm simplifying Nestorius' teachings somewhat. In reality, it was more complex. However, we don't currently have the time or the need to delve into all those doctrinal intricacies, and I believe I have conveyed the essence adequately. So, this teaching naturally was rejected and condemned as heretical at the Council of Ephesus. And so it seems that the individuals responsible for the iconographic program of the Santa Maria Maggiore Church, they wanted to emphasize fallacy of Nestorius, as well as to highlight the dogma that was affirmed by the Church. They needed to show that the child of Mary, from the very beginning, from the moment of his birth, was a special child, a divine child. But how could they convey this idea? Well, by deviating from traditional iconography. When we see Mary with the infant Christ in her arms, we understand intellectually that he is the child of God, but he appears as a normal human child, right? However, in this case, by depicting him as an adolescent, even though the story suggests that he has just come into this world, well, they vividly convey to us that although he possesses human body, he is not an ordinary human being. He is already a God. He is God from the moment of conception. Here is a wonderful example of how art refers to complex theological themes and ideas, which each of us has the obligation to some extent to understand. Early Christian mosaics offer numerous similar examples. So, if you like to delve into those intricacies, I strongly suggest you take a look at my course of lectures, The First Acquaintance, because one of the parts of this course is actually all about the mosaics of early Roman churches as well as the mosaics of famous churches in Ravenna. And trust me, they contain a lot of those nuanced religious messages and intricacies. So, the link to the course is supposed to be somewhere around here, and it costs pretty much nothing, and even those money you can get back if you want, since there is a full money back guarantee. So I don't really see why I should be talking you into it so much. Just find the link, click it, tap it, enroll, and I will see you inside with more intricacies and more religious subtleties expressed in the great art of the past. And I'm sure you will love it as much as I do.